does. Everyone's boss goes out with COVID. I think most people would know that in the last 2 years, and then people around them have to step up. We'd planned for that. And I think one of the great strengths of Anthony's leadership is he's very happy to be a part of a team, a leader of a team, but he's very confident about his team's ability to carry forward the message. You know, it is a team approach. It's not one person's message, it's all of ours that we've been working on for 3 years, and I think we did a pretty good job minding the shop, but we're really happy that he's back on deck now.
Now, it's striking that you are still a week ahead of pre-poll voting, and the coalition is going to launch, as we understand it, just 1 week out from the main event on the 21st of May. So just to Probes' point, you know, was that deliberate to try and get in with enough time to lay out policies, which we'll talk about in a moment, well in advance of voting starting?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, certainly when you're in opposition, you don't have all of the, resources of government. So you have to look at the campaign, how it works. Part of our message is that we're ready, that we've done the work, we've got the policies. We think the choice is clear between Labor's message and what the government is offering, sort of more of the same after 9 years, and a Prime Minister who sort of says, well, I can't really change anything, with a plan that we're putting out there, which we've been talking about for the last few weeks. Yeah. We've got to make sure that we are selling our message. We're making sure that people can hear that before they go and cast their vote.
And so to that end, you flesh out a little more policy detail today. Fair to say, in expectation, that cost of living is at the centre of that?
Well, cost of living is really at the centre of all of our policies when you look at them, and this isn't an issue that's just happened in the last few months or the last week with the dreadful inflation figure. I mean, this has been something people have been talking about for years. Anyone with a kid in childcare, anyone paying rent, anybody doing the groceries, you know, they can see all the prices going up, wages aren't keeping up. So yes, cost of living is probably the number one issue that's been raised with me and my colleagues on the ground, and yeah, our policies are tailored to that.
Tell us about your housing policy today. It's an effort to get low and modest income earners into the housing market, but it's a pretty delicate balance, isn't it, when you've got a housing market that is already overheated? How do you stop it getting even more hot?
Yeah, so I mean, we've spent a fair bit of time looking at what role government can play in the housing market and dealing with some of those challenges. Again, it's something that comes up constantly on the ground. So we have a range of policies. I know we probably don't have time to go through all of those today, but we're looking at supportive and affordable accommodation, as well as having a national approach to housing, and the Commonwealth being at the table, basically talking to states and territories. But this is a new way of doing things, of looking at, you know, ensuring that people on lower income, so it's couples under 120,000, can borrow less, have less debt and have less mortgage repayments, but still be putting their foot into that home ownership area. And I think, you know, it's a scheme that's worked around the world, it's a scheme that's worked in other states, and we think it's a sensible and measured way to have a look at whether we can support more people into housing at that area, whilst, you know, people are conscious about the level of debt they take on. But it is a balance. That's why it's 10,000 houses a year. You know, we've taken all of those issues into consideration, and we think it's a sensible way forward.
We will talk to Jason Clare about some of the details later. 10,000 is highly limited nationally, of course. So what is the selection? How would people, assuming this is oversubscribed, is it first in, best dressed?
Yeah, well, I think those you're probably best asking that of Jason Clare. But yeah, there would be an application process, and we would have to look at how much demand there was for the scheme. There's also state schemes that operate, and so how they interrelate to each other is important as well. But yes, I mean, we're putting the caps on, we're putting the limits on income, and that should self-select a group.
So as we are in the hump day of the election campaign, halfway through, where are you sitting, do you think? Are you sitting pretty? Are you sitting in a spot where you perhaps have to better explain what you represent, who Anthony Albanese is?
My honest assessment is I think we're competitive, but I don't think we certainly don't take anything for granted, you know, and I think we've learnt the lessons of 2019. We've done the hard work, and we're going to campaign.
What were those lessons of 2019?
Well, Well, that we took too much, that people didn't understand the story, that it was an ambitious...
Are you taking too little this time?
No, I don't think so. I think what we're trying to do is tailor down into those key areas, you know, renewable energy, childcare, aged care, a future made in Australia, those areas, and have a story to wrap around that about the country we'd like to see, the government we'd like to lead with Anthony. So yeah, we've done a lot of work and we are ready, but we're not taking anything for granted. And I think honestly, you know, there's a long way to go in this campaign, and we're going to work hard, and Anthony's going to work hard right up till 6 p.m. on 21st of May. We take nothing for granted at all.
Just finally, I know you're a bit in the bubble. Maybe you're not the best to judge these things, but comparative campaign bubble, leadership bubble. Campaign enthusiasm, I suppose, since we're making comparisons with 3 years ago, do you think it's a little lower? That groundswell of expectation is diminished this time compared to where you were 3 weeks out last time?
I don't think so. I mean, we were at a fantastic barbecue yesterday, really, you know, people really excited. You know, like there is a level of energy and enthusiasm for sure. It's been a long campaign. I mean, Scott Morrison decided to make it 42 days, and that means you have to spread your strategy out. But no, I mean, energetic, ready, wanting to sell our message, got a lot more to do, a lot more to say. And I know you're all really excited about watching that over the next 20-odd days.
We'll be watching, and there'll be no shortage of enthusiasm, I'm certain, once you get inside the auditorium here at Perth Stadium. Katie Gallagher, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks.
OK, so Katie Gallagher has taken up her position for this campaign launch. Still, roughly speaking, 20-odd minutes away. You never can be quite certain with these things. They're meant to go like clockwork, Andrew Probyn. Rarely do they. But why don't we pull apart some of the issues? There's some policy which we can discuss a little later. But on timing, there might be some who think, gee, they're going early in a 6-week campaign. They're officially launching with 3 weeks to go. Logic says campaigns are all about capturing those who waver or are undecided. Can you go, is there such a thing as going too early?
Well, it depends on what you want to do. I think if we look at the coalition for a start, it looks like the coalition is going to be having its election campaign launch towards the end of the campaign. We're hearing the Sunday before we all go to vote. Now, what will that be about? That will be about capturing all the voters who are a bit undecided. And in this election, as the polls seem to be indicating, there are a lot of people who are not going to vote or say they're not going to be voting for the majors. So perhaps the coalition tactic is about trying to capture those people who are unsure. This time around, with the Labor launch, we've got 3 weeks to go. It's right slap bang in the middle of that election 6-week campaign. But the tactic here is to push into this week ahead of next. And what's happening next week? Something that does involve the Australian Electoral Commission. Yes, pre-polling starts. And so pre-polling is going to be quite substantial. And so I think the tactic here from the Labor Party is to use this week to capture the attention of the Australian voter, and then to hopefully capture the pre-poll votes early. Yep, hence sprinkling a couple of policy announcements over this launch. One is about shared equity in housing. We can discuss that a little later. But inside the venue, up a level or two, is Jane Norman, our fellow political reporter from Parliament House in Canberra, but a native of Western Australia initially. Jane, why don't you set the scene for us up there? You're much closer to the launch location than we are out here. Beautiful though this setting is, you are at the Nerve Centre. Has everyone arrived? I think we're expecting among the VIPs a couple of former Prime Ministers too today.
Yeah, we sure are, Greg. Well, it's very noisy in here, so I hope you can hear me above the music. But look, it is awash with red, really, inside this conference room in the Optus Stadium. Behind me, you might spot some state Labor MPs. There's a whole bunch of federal front benches. Jim Chalmers, Katie Gallagher, Bill Shorten, Christina Keneally, Don Farrell. They're all here for this big event. And two of the VIPs, we understand, are former Prime Ministers Kevin Rudd and Paul Keating. They're not here yet. I assume they're going to have some sort of big grand entrance with Labor leader Anthony Albanese. And he'll also be joined by some very popular state premiers, none other than Mark McGowan, whose star power is pretty great here in WA, and that is something Anthony Albanese is hoping to capitalise on as he goes on the attack here in the West. And also South Australian Labor Premier Peter Malinauskas, who just led his own Labor team to victory in South Australia. So a lot of energy in this room, and we know, Greg, that this is a big event for Mr Albanese. He's lost a week in isolation, and this is his big chance, really, to regain that much-needed momentum.
Now, Jane, it's looking like very much like the set of Q&A in there, but we understand that you caught up with a couple of front benches behind the scenes.
I sure have, and look, we've got the camera positioned this way because Labor supporters do not want to reveal the stage until the big event starts around 11 o'clock, and of course we'll bring that to our viewers very shortly. But look, I spoke to the Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers a short time ago. We know that the three words that are going to define this whole election campaign are cost of living, and that is at the centre of Anthony Albanese's pitch today. We've spoken about the housing policy, helping up to 10,000 Australians get into the market by effectively having the government purchase up to 40% of their homes. It's a much more modest proposal than the one Labor took to the 2019 election, and that is the line of questioning that I put to Mr Chalmers when I caught up with him outside here just a short time ago. Jim Chalmers, back in 2019, Labor took a big policy of addressing housing affordability by cutting the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing. How is your policy now going to better that?
Well, we've made it very clear we're not going down that path. We found a better way to deal with these pressures in the housing market. House prices went up something like 25% last year. Fewer and fewer people on lower and moderate incomes are able to get a toehold in the housing market. Our plan today that we're announcing at this launch here in Perth is all about smaller deposits, smaller mortgages and smaller repayments, getting more people into the market.
You previously said, though, that you can't address housing affordability without addressing those taxes. Do you still believe that's the case?
No, that's not my view. My view is that this is the best way, combined with our other housing policies, social housing, affordable housing and some of the other steps that we're taking. This is the best way to deal with the housing part of Scott Morrison's cost of living crisis.
Labor is clearly tapping into the concerns about cost of living here, but it is a pretty modest proposal. Only 10,000 people a year will benefit from it. The Coalition says its first home buyers scheme helped about 160,000 Australians last year.
We've been supportive of the steps that the government's taken. This is in addition to what the government is proposing. And we've got to be responsible. We would be inheriting a budget which is heaving with $1 trillion in debt and not enough to show for it. And so we'll be responsible. We think this will make a meaningful difference to people who are trying to get into the housing market. This cost of living crisis has many aspects. Housing is one of them, power bills another, childcare, of course, access to affordable healthcare. We've got policies in each of those areas, and that really is the choice here. And what Anthony Albanese will be talking about today is a better future under Labor and Anthony Albanese, where we try and do something about Scott Morrison's cost of living crisis versus another 3 years of dysfunction and drift and families falling further and further behind.
The Coalition's announced a policy to make medicines cheaper by about $10 per script. Labor has indicated it might be working on something in that area. Can we expect an announcement regarding that today?
You can, but I'll leave it to Anthony to make that announcement.
Will it be bettering the Coalition?
Oh, you have to wait and see. It'll be career limiting in the extreme for me to preempt Anthony's announcement, but we've made it clear for some time that we think that there is something responsible we can do here to make medicines cheaper. You'll hear more about that.
You are the Treasurer. I want to ask you about interest rates. We've seen that cash is so low that inflation is rising beyond expectations. Would it be irresponsible if the RBA did not lift interest rates on Tuesday?
Well, unlike Josh Frydenberg, I'm not going to give free advice to the independent Reserve Bank. They will make their decision independent of political pressure from the Treasurer or from anybody else. The market expects there to be a rate rise, if not this Tuesday, then certainly next month.
Does there need to be a rate rise to keep inflation, well, at least put a lid on it?
Well, I focus on what governments can do, right? And the responsibility of governments, which this government has vacated the field on, is to grow the economy without adding to inflationary pressures, get real wages moving again and ease the cost of living on Australian families. That's my focus.
Okay, the launch today is happening in my beautiful home city of Perth.
Very
it is stunning. It's really put on a show today. I wanted to ask you, though, Western Australia, you're only looking to pick up about 3 seats here. Does that show just how close this election is going to be? Like, if Anthony Albanese can't win seats here, can he win the election?
Well, I think the election will be close. We've said all along this election will be an absolute squeaker. and we're trying to change the government and give this country a better future. That's never easy. You said only 3 seats in WA. I'd be incredibly pleased if we could get that many, but we take no outcome in any seat for granted. This will go right down to the wire, and it is a pretty simple choice. You know, we cannot afford and we cannot risk, we cannot bet our future on another 3 years of skyrocketing costs of living, falling real wages, rising interest rates, and people falling further and further behind under Scott Morrison.
So why WA for the launch?
Because Anthony wants to demonstrate that he wants to govern for the whole country. And what better demonstration of that than coming to the great city of Perth in the great state of WA to show that he wants to govern for the whole place. And that, I think that's an important message. Anthony's leadership is defined by his capacity to bring people together, to solve our big national challenges, to work with the premiers, not against them. And one of the choices at this election is Anthony Albanese working closely with Mark McGowan or Scott Morrison working closely with Clive Palmer.
All right, we'll see Mark McGowan at today's launch. Jim Chalmers, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jane.
All right, the Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers, they're hinting at some more cost of living type policies to come in this speech. And just while we have been playing you that interview, I've noticed another heavyweight here of the Labor Movement ACTU Secretary Sally McManus sitting down. And actually just behind me now, Mark McGowan, the Premier of WA, is walking into the room. A standing ovation and some loud applause. The most popular politician in Australia right now. And that's where we'll leave it from here because we're being moved into our positions ahead of the start of this launch. I'll throw back to you, Greg and Andrew Probyn.
No, thanks so much, Jane Norman. We completely understand how these things work. Orchestrated, stage managed, whatever you might call it. They leave nothing to chance. But Mark McGowan, very much the man of the moment for the ALP. Jim Chalmers probes, as he was talking to Jane, taking this pan-Australia position of great inclusion.
Laying it on thickly,
showing
I thought,
the love
Greg, yeah.
to Western Australia. He certainly is. I guess that's behind the entire design of coming here in pursuit of 3 seats, remembering the magic number for Anthony Albanese and the opposition is 7 clear gains at this election. If they could, perchance, find 3 of those here in the West, well, that would be pretty happy hunting. But why don't we take it back to these cost of living announceables, as they call them in the trade. So we've got this housing initiative. What would we call that? Modest in its scope?
Very modest. Let's remember the 2019 election. We had Bill Shorten, who had a vast manifesto of many policies. A couple of them were on negative gearing, capital gains tax. The Labor Party was saying in 2019 that housing affordability, the rising cost of living, these could be tackled or partly tackled with these policies. These policies have been binned. And despite the fact that there's been people on both sides of the political arena over the years who've said that negative gearing is a problem.
Well, they were really ambitious on the revenue side, but if you want to do things on the support or expenditure side, that just got a whole lot more expensive in the last 3 years with what is, in effect, an asset bubble during the pandemic under low interest rates.
Absolutely, and this is one of the questions, I suppose, for both sides of politics. Whatever you do in housing, you've got to make sure that you don't further heat it, because housing affordability, rental affordability, has become a monumental issue. And will this make any difference, or make difference on the margins? But compared to the policies that we've seen, the economic reforms that have been proposed in years past, this is extremely modest.
Yep, and just one footnote, I think it was alluded to by Jim Chalmers, we could reasonably expect some sort of move on the cost of subsidised medicines. That is the out-of-pocket expense that we each confront with our prescriptions.
Well, it looks like that's going to be a contested space. We saw the government has proposed its own $10 slash to the PBS cost. So a script costs you about $42.50 presently. The government is going to be reducing that by $10 to $32. So is this the sort of space that the Labor will be moving on? Well, we'll soon find out.
OK, well, before they all went in to take up their positions in the auditorium, where Jane Norman was just reporting from a moment ago, we did manage to catch up with a few other ALP members. One is Matt Keogh. He's the member for the electorate of Burt with a margin of 5.5%, and it must be said, a pretty proud West Australian. Well, Matt Keogh, we're looking at the party faithful. I know it's a hackneyed phrase, but they are filing in here for this ALP launch in a way that is almost unique, not quite. There's, for you West Australians, a bit of a sense of history.
We're pretty excited. I mean, first time we've had the National Labor Party launch in WA since the Second World War, since John Curtin, great WA Labor Prime Minister. So it is very exciting for all the party members, the true believers, the supporters to be able to host the national launch here in Western Australia.
So what's the purpose of it being in Perth? There must be a tactic here.
Well, certainly it's about highlighting the importance of Western Australia, not just to this election, but actually to the whole nation.
Yeah.
And what we've seen in Western Australia and what we've experienced has been the Morrison government not recognising that. Instead, we've seen Scott Morrison join with Clive Palmer, attack WA's border in the High Court. We've seen Scott Morrison call Western Australians cave dwellers. And this is a demonstration of what I think Western Australians know, which is Labor is about standing up for WA.
So this is all about political opportunity. How many seats are you targeting here, realistically?
Well, I think there's a clear focus on 3 seats here in Western Australia, and that's what we're focusing on, is making sure that we're able to hopefully get the best result out of winning those 3 seats. So Swan, Pearce and Hasluck. Obviously making sure we hold on to the seat of Cowan with Anne on a narrow margin there as well.
There have been so many false dawns, though, as people look to the West on federal election nights before. They really haven't determined a government result for years, decades now. What, hanging over from the McGowan experiment or experience last year, tells you that those 3 seats are attainable?
Well, I think what we've seen through Mark McGowan's record win last year is that Western Australians are principally focused on what's in the best interests of Western Australia. And they saw a state government here that kept them safe and strong through the COVID pandemic and set them up well for the future, protected our critical resources industry, which not only helped the WA economy and protected people's jobs, but it protected the whole national economy. I mean, this great record of economic management under Morrison is a furphy. It's actually WA that's been doing the heavy lifting.
Well, it's actually a very different story, a pandemic story, WA.
Absolutely.
Your school children hardly lost any weeks to home education. The economy is astonishing. We've got the state government is going to record a $7-8 billion surplus. How do the politics of a pandemic affect an election, a federal election?
Well, I think what it highlights actually is that Scott Morrison and the Liberals haven't delivered through COVID. They've seen the stark contrast of the approach in Western Australia and a number of other states, frankly, about how they've handled the pandemic. It's been the Western Australian state Labor government that has kept people safe here, and they've experienced the problems of not getting vaccines rolled out over to WA quickly enough. We were complaining about the lack of proper quarantine facilities here in WA for a long time, and I think Western Australians are really aware that Scott Morrison wasn't backing the WA
Scott
approach.
Morrison says he delivered WA this GST deal. This GST deal is actually going to land WA an next $2.5 billion that will in effect come from other states. I know there's a compensation clause. Is it right that WA, the most prosperous state, gets so much money from the other states?
I think the key thing here is it's about a 70-cent floor. It's a 70% floor in the GST, and that is fair. That is fundamentally fair for any state that utilises it, and it's Western Australia that's getting the benefit.
Why is it fair
in
in the middle of a pandemic when the rest of the country is deeply in the red?
Because all of those states also get the benefit of that floor as well. And I think there's a whole heap of other complicating factors that go into the formula around the GST, which I won't bore everyone with right now. But that floor is fundamentally fair. But the other thing that Western Australians are aware of is that Josh Frydenberg, when he was here in WA, couldn't rule out bringing forward a review of that GST arrangement. So he is saying, oh, well, that might be put at risk. We've ruled out bringing that forward because we understand the importance of that deal, and Josh Frydenberg hasn't ruled out bringing that review forward.
Well, there might be people in Eastern Australia who think that would be a good thing to review it sooner rather than later. But just finally on the momentum thing, how much of the strategy here locally in the West is built off the McGowan wave, surfing that?
Well, certainly Mark McGowan and his government are incredibly popular, and they're a great demonstration.
Do you think still?
Yes, they are.
Or is some of that washed
popular
off?
I couldn't tell you what the most recent figures are, but they are still incredibly popular, and I know when I'm door knocking and phoning and talking to people, they do have the highest regard for the McGowan government. And one of the things that they see in that government is a government that's delivered good economic management. They see an example of how Labor governments are good economic managers, and that's really important here as well.
All right, well, he'll be here and supporting you all the way through, I imagine. Matt Keogh, thanks for joining us today. We better let you get in for the main event.
It's been great to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
You're watching ABC News live coverage of the ALP's official campaign launch for the 2022 federal election. Political editor Andrew Probyn and Greg Jennett coming to you from outside Perth Stadium, where, as you can see on your screen now, most of the dignitaries and party members have taken up their positions in anticipation of the start of formal proceedings. Now, Probes, this isn't normally just hit cold and clean with the leader's entry to the room. There's usually other support events, sometimes a profile video of the leader and the front bench team. There's Peter Malinauskas, as wildly popular almost in his state of South Australia as Mark McGowan is here in the West. But in any event, we will hear others seeking to introduce Anthony Albanese. His deputy, though, Richard Miles, won't be able to do that this time around due to COVID. But this is the sort of program which we haven't sort of had officially sketched out to us behind the scenes, but what we could reasonably expect. And that slogan too, Probes, a better future.
Better future. Well, this is all about the vision question, and this was the perhaps the weakness that is in the government's pitch to the population. It's talked about its handling of the pandemic. It's talked about how well it's handled the economy in such difficult times, but it's the vision question is where it's perhaps weakest. Labor is seeking to answer that by offering ideas on childcare, things that go beyond the here and now, beyond the 6-month period of some of these measures that do address cost of living, things like the petrol excise. But what we can expect shortly is, I imagine, a couple of the ex-prime ministers to be promoted, and what's the point there, Greg? It's to show that Anthony Albanese is part of this continuum.
Well, he certainly is a Labor figure who has spanned a number of prime ministerships. How could you not after a quarter of a century in the parliament? That's how long Albo, as they call him, has been in the parliament and served, more than his fair share of opposition years. But often forgotten is the fact that he was a deputy prime minister of Australia under Kevin Rudd in his second coming, and Kevin Rudd himself is going to be in that room shortly, if he's not already there, along with Paul Keating, we expect. And
no Julia Gillard today. She's still in London, hasn't been able to get away, but I think the relationship she's had with Anthony Albanese has had its moments, but there obviously was that moment when he
Ladies and gentlemen,
Albanese decided that he was going to.
Welcome to Perth's
Well, they're starting to
Stadium
call the audience to
Country.
attention. I assume
Could you
that
please
means
switch
turn
your
off your
phones
mobile
to
phones
silent?
and a lot of the housekeeping messages, but that is
now, from the
beginning to
Wadumba
occur.
Gunga
So
Dance
as soon
Group,
as there are
would you please all
tangible
give a
signs
warm
of
welcome
movement, we'll
to
be
James Webb.
silent and let the launch speak for itself. They're about to go into the Welcome to Country, so why don't we hop back at this point and take you over to the ALP lounge.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning. Kaya kaya wanju, nalmi al Europe, and nicha nunga buja ngalang nonuk ninyini. I'm James Webb, or you can call me Gumbiari, my traditional name. I perform and run the Wadumba Nunga Dance Group. We go out to a lot of schools, festivals, and a lot of stuff over the last 20 years. I'm a senior Nunga man, and it's my pleasure to be here today and create some music for you to set the scene. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the musical interlude, part of the welcome to country here in Perth, Western
Sandra
Australia.
Harbin will now give a welcome to country, so let's welcome Sandra to the stage.
Clare and Wanju. Hello and welcome. My name is Sandra Harbin, or Collard, and I'm a Whadjuk Noongar woman. My Mort or my family come from the Benel, Maguire and Reedy family groups. You will hear the first language of this land spoken throughout my welcome to country here today. That is the Noongar language. Australia's Aboriginal cultures are the oldest and continuous living cultures in the world, of which the Noongar nation is the largest cultural bloc in Australia. So I'm very proud to be part of the Noongar nation. Nunuk Yaking Nija Whadjuk Noongar Buja. We are all standing here on Whadjuk Noongar land. Ngan Yaking Nija, I am standing here to conduct this welcome to country on behalf of the Whadjuk Noongar people and the Noongar nation at this significant event, the launch of the 2022 ALP federal election campaign launch. The Whadjuk Noongar people acknowledge the past, present and future Britiers or leaders of our country, the Honourable Anthony Albanese and the Honourable Premier of Western Australia, Mark McGowan. Kaya. I acknowledge my Noongar elders, Yiye, Kura, Yiye, Buddha. So I also acknowledge my Noongar elders from the past, present and emerging. Our elders are our Britiers or our leaders, our bosses. They are the Britia of Kadajan, Murt and Buja, leaders and bosses of family, land and country. Our Britiers uphold Noongar law. I would like to particularly acknowledge Mr. Rudd and Mr. Keating. Kaya, thank you for starting the healing of our country. Sharing some of the Noongar cultural tradition or knowledge is an important part of Welcome to Country. So for Noongar people, the Warkal is the Noongar rainbow serpent. It's the creator of the Noongar universe and giver of Noongar law, and gives Noongar people meaning to the foundation of life. Because the Warkal created the Belia, the beautiful Swan River, the Karadamunda, the beautiful Darling Scarp, which Noongar say represents the body of the Warkal. Matagarup, the place where Noongar people crossed from Mindira to Boorloo to the Perth city. And Wundulia, the bend of the river where the Optus Stadium now stands. Optus Stadium stands in the vicinity of Mindira, a camping and gathering place where all of the 14 Noongar language groups came together to carry out law and ceremonial business. A place we can now associate with the business of shaping the values, laws and governance of the nation by the ALP. Wanju wajak Noongar buja, kura kura ngan murt, nini nihamwanganing Noongar cultural tradition. Welcome to Wajak Noongar land. You know, a long time ago, our Wajak families sat, they listened and they passed on Noongar cultural knowledge to ensure the future of our identity, stories and law. Today we sit, listen and talk about the shared future of this nation. Ngan wabaring the kwabara wirin, yar kur kwabara wirin, word kur wara wirin. I have asked for the beautiful spirits to come here and to be with you and keep you all safe, protect you and bring good health to all of you here today. Can you all join in with me in giving a shout of praise in the Noongar language, wura? Wura. Thank you. Kaya. Nunuk doint doint kurin, kwabada, wuja, yiye, mila and budawan. May we all go along here together on Wajak land here today, tomorrow and in the future. Kaya and budawan, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please be upstanding for the national anthem? Thank you. Please welcome the Labor candidate for Swan, Zanita Mascarenhas.
Kaya Wanju. I'd like to acknowledge the Wajak people of the Noongar Nation, their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you, James and Sandra, for that fabulous performance and welcome to country. I'm also proud that Labor will implement the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I'd like to also acknowledge former Prime Minister Paul Keating former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, Premier Peter Malinauskas, Premier Mark McGowan, and the President of the Australian Labor Party, Wayne Swan. My name's Zanita Mascaradis. I'm Labor's candidate for Swan, the electorate I'm lucky to call home. Welcome to Optus Stadium. You are right here in the heart of Swan. You're also at the home of last year's AFL Grand Final. Running for Parliament, it really is the perfect expression. It conveys the urgency of the task ahead. I'm running because I want to stand up for my community in the Parliament. I think that we want more. It's time for change. Australia is so ready, and I want to be a part of that change. I'm the daughter of a metal worker and kindy cleaner. I was born in Kalgoorlie and grew up in Campbelda, a nickel mining town. I studied science and engineering at Curtin Uni, steel cap boots on a mine site. That's how I started my career. I've worked across dozens of sites across Australia, and for the last 12 years, I've worked as an engineer in climate change action. I'm now raising my family in East Vic Park. I love the opportunities that Australia and the Australian Labor Party has given me. Labor has been an extended family to me. Here in Swan and in every electorate across Australia, we have thousands of people stepping up to volunteer. Together, we're knocking on doors. In Swan, we've knocked on over 35,000 doors. We're picking up phones, we're spreading the word, and we're doing it because we know this country needs a change, that we can aim higher, that we deserve more. Our people are the heart and soul of the party. And as I look around this room and I see so many that have done this for the first time and some that are seasoned campaigners, and to all of you, I say, love your work. One of the things that's wonderful about the Labor Party is that we are more than a political party. We are a movement, a community of people who want a better deal for all Australians. The spirit of the Albanese Labor government will be amazing and just has been the spirit of every Labor government. No more pitting mate against mate or state against state. An Australian government that believes in Australia and backs all Australians. An Australian government that brings us together to set us on a path to a better future. And right at the heart of that Australian Labor government will be the person I'm about to introduce. Last week, Penny Wong did me the very great honour of launching the Swan campaign. Penny Wong is an inspiration. She's smart, compassionate, and like all good Labor people, she cares about fairness and inclusion. She represents us on a global stage, generating respect for Australia and standing up for Australian values around the world. Friends, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you the one and only Senator Penny Wong.
Thank you, Zanita, for that warm introduction. It's wonderful to be here in the great state of Western Australia. And can I thank again on your behalf James Webb and Sandra Harben for their welcome to country. A reminder that of the many reasons for a Labor government, first among them is the opportunity to fulfil the promise of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Friends, Australia should have a government as decent as its people. Our great nation deserves a great future. And on the 21st of May, Australians have a chance to choose that future. Never doubt how stark a choice this is. Never doubt that who governs matters. The most difficult days of the past 3 years have shown us that. The smoke of the Black Summer fires had barely cleared when COVID-19 reached us, and we were thrown into a new reality of lockdowns, masks and QR codes. We worked from home and set up classrooms around the kitchen table. We had Zoom meetings, Zoom drinks, and we had sad times too. We tragically had Zoom funerals. Families and friends were separated, livelihoods were lost, and industries were ravaged by a combination of the pandemic and deliberate government neglect. Australians in insecure work felt the brunt. Older Australians in aged care homes were left vulnerable, and then the floods came. Yes, the worst of times brings out the best in Australians, but too often their strength has not been matched by leadership. And as the world at home shifted, so too did the world beyond, and we feel those reverberations today. Russia continues its brutal war on Ukraine, and closer to home, developments in Solomon Islands remind us that complacency can exact a heavy price. Mr Morrison's best offer is more of the same, but that would carry the biggest price tag of all. So friends, on May 21st, Australians can choose something so much better. It's a choice between a united, focused Labor team or the Liberals and Nationals, a rabble that masquerades as a coalition, whose own members warn Australians that Scott Morrison is not fit to be the Prime Minister. It's a choice between Labor, which has delivered the big reforms and 3 decades of unbroken economic growth, and the Morrison government, which doesn't know when to stop spending for themselves and never thought to start governing. A choice between a decade of disappointment and hope for the future. So friends, let's talk about the man who embodies that hope. A man who embodies the optimism and clear-eyed vision of the great Australian Labor Party he leads. The Albo I know is a man of courage and conviction, the most steadfast of friends, the toughest of fighters, and the kindest of hearts. I know no one braver for his cause, no one more reliable when you need him. He will stand with you when it is easy and when it is hard, because he is driven by belief and compassion and integrity. To call him a people person would be underselling it. There's nothing quite like turning Albo loose in a full room and seeing just how much he thrives on the energy. And most importantly, he wants to bring people together. Albo is collaborative, and it is that instinct which makes him so effective. He wants to work together. He wants to find the answers together. That spirit of inclusiveness was there shining brightly in his very first speech to Parliament, and it is as central to who he is today as it was then. I know he will always step up. I know he will always take responsibility. These are the traits of a true friend and the mark of a true leader. Anthony Albanese will bring us together as Australians, just as Labor always has. Friends, we've only formed government 3 times from opposition since the end of World War II, but we have made it count. It is Labor governments that have changed this country for the better. Medicare, the NDIS, accessible education, universal superannuation, the Sex Discrimination Act, the Racial Discrimination Act, native title, the apology to the stolen generations. It is Labor governments that built Australia's modern economy to the benefit of working people and employers alike. And it is Labor governments that always ensure secure, better paid jobs. Friends, we understand that the privilege of forming government is not to be squandered. And friends, it is that same desire to create positive, lasting change that will drive the next Labor government, a team with experience, energy and empathy to build a better future. People like our next speaker, please welcome Jason Clare.
G'day everyone. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and their elders past, present and emerging. Former Prime Ministers Paul Keating and Kevin Rudd. Friends, Scott Morrison says this election isn't about him, that it's about you. And he's right. It is about you and how he's failed you. Not just flying off to Hawaii when our country was on fire, or thinking he could fix it with a forced handshake. Not just failing to buy enough vaccines when half the country was locked down. Not just leaving Aussies on their roof to escape the floods, forced to hire their own helicopters. It's more than that. It's refusing to take responsibility for anything, and it just keeps happening. It happened again this week when the worst inflation results in 20 years came out. Inflation's through the roof, real wages through the floor, and now interest rate rises are knocking on the door. Life is getting harder, not easier. And what did Scott Morrison say this week? It's not my fault. It's not my job. How many times have you heard that? You deserve better than that. This is the best country in the world. But you deserve a better government. You deserve better than a government that blows $5.5 billion on submarines that don't exist. You deserve better than a government that drops $50 billion on an NBN made out of enough copper to wrap around the planet 1.5 times. A government that's responsible for the worst decade of wage growth in history and did it to you deliberately. A government that thinks all you need to do to win the trust of Pacific nations is play the ukulele. And thinks climate change is what happens when you check out the April sun in Cuba. And a Prime Minister who thinks there's no problem with corruption in his government, while sitting there in his cabinet are more smoking guns than a Clint Eastwood movie. A Prime Minister who thinks his job is to dress up pretending to do other people's jobs. This bloke is all tinsel, no tree. Nothing about this bloke is real except his ability to let you down. This government has now been in power for almost a decade, and they're asking for another decade. But they're not going to change, and they're not going to get any better. And they're not going to fix the big challenges that we face. If you want to fix the crisis in aged care, then we've got to change the government. If you want cheaper childcare, we've got to change the government. If you want to make it easier to see the doctor, if you want to make it easier to buy a home, if you want us to make more things here in Australia, we've got to change the government. And if you want more secure jobs and better pay, if you want real action on climate change, if you want to cut your electricity bills, we've got to change the government. And if you finally want to recognise Indigenous Australians in our Constitution and create an Indigenous voice to Parliament, we've got to change the government. And if you want to make sure that corrupt politicians don't get away scot-free, then we've got to change the government. That's why we need a Labor government. We are the party that has shaped this country for the better. We're the party of Medicare, of superannuation, the NDIS. We're the party of the big economic reforms that have made Australia what it is today. We're the party that turns the Australia of your imagination into something real. And Australia, Labor is led by a man who is all of that. An honest man. Someone who doesn't treat politics like it's a game. Someone who didn't make up his own nickname. Someone who will take responsibility, not shirk it. Someone who will work to bring us together, not try and pull us apart. Someone who understands that the most fertile place to plant our dreams and build a better future is the common ground between us. In Anthony, I see the unbending conviction of someone who knows that governments at their best really can change the lives of Australians for the better. He knows it because he's lived it. When he speaks about his childhood, it's not a plea for sympathy. It's the story of a mother's love. And it's the story of how hard work and good governments really can change the lives of people for the better. And it's also what's forged in him this philosophy that will guide us if we win your trust and win your vote. No one held back and no one left behind. And that's what makes him the Prime Minister Australia desperately needs right now. Anthony Albanese. Albo! But before you hear from him, it's time to hear from another great Labor leader, someone who has kept this state safe and strong in the teeth of the pandemic, someone who is building a better future right here, right now in WA. Please welcome the Premier, Mark McGowan.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, everyone, and thank you so much, Jason, for that welcome. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, their elders past, present and emerging. It's a great pleasure to have the Labor family together, all here in the great state of Western Australia. Who would have thought that in a 12-month period, Western Australia would play host to some of the biggest shows in Australia? The AFL Grand Final, the Brownlow Medal Count, the Rugby League State of Origin, the AFL Dreamtime Game, and the Australian Labor Party campaign launch. I welcome our state and federal colleagues here in Perth today, including South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas, former Prime Ministers Paul Keating and Kevin Rudd, and the next Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese. Anthony and I are completely in sync. It's not just about delivering affordable TAFE or more local manufacturing jobs. It runs much deeper than that. We both caught COVID on the same day. We are both proud poodle owners. His is Toto, mine is Georgie. Both of us have been on a diet for some time and lost a fair bit of weight between us. But no matter how hard we work at it, neither of us looks like Peter Malinauskas. Anthony, like me, is a student of history. Both of us understand the importance of Western Australia, not just to the federal election, but to the prosperity of the country and the history of the great Australian Labor Party. Western Australia was home to two of our nation's greatest citizens and Prime Ministers. John Curtin, who practically ran the nation from Perth. He saved Australia from a disastrous Conservative government and an even bigger external threat. And Bob Hawke, who spent most of his upbringing and university years in Leederville, in a house not far from the brand new Perth school we built that proudly bears his name, Bob Hawke College. When he was still with us, Bob told me he always identified as a Western Australian. He remembered at age 10 being introduced by his uncle and future Premier, Bert Hawke, to the great man himself, John Curtin. Bob understood deeply that the success of all our states and regions is crucial to the success of the nation, that the entire country needs to be carried forward together. That's the Labor ethos that I believe in. That's the Labor ethos that Anthony believes in. A fair go for everyone, no matter where you start in life or the opportunities that you have, no matter the colour of your skin, no matter the state or territory you call home, whether you're in Perth or Penrith, Headland or Hobart, Broome or Brisbane, everyone deserves a fair go in life. There are no Liberal states or Labor states. All around the country, there are only Australian states, with men and women who want to see governments that care about what they care about. Quality jobs, quality healthcare, a protected environment, and a bright future for them and for future generations. This campaign, we are talking to these Australians. WA has been incredibly successful over the last few years. We have been tested and we've come out on top. Some of the best economic, health and social outcomes in the entire world. The lowest unemployment rate of all the states. The strongest set of finances. The only government in Australia in surplus and the only government paying down debt. Just this Tuesday, Deloitte's Access Economics declared Western Australia was one of the best performing economies in the entire world. Other leading economic and financial institutions have recently published reports saying very similar things about Western Australia. And friends, we know that it is Labor governments that best manage our economy and responsibly manage our finances. The evidence is in, and it's beyond reasonable doubt. The Liberals and Nationals can't manage money. They can't manage money. Our success in Western Australia comes from strong Labor economic and financial management. Our careful and cautious approach during the pandemic, and the magnificent effort of all Western Australians doing the right thing over the last 2 years. WA's success helps fund the nation. It helps fund Australia's recovery. Western Australia is proud to contribute to the rest of the country. We had to make the tough calls to be where we are today. We took responsibility during the pandemic. As a state, we stepped up and did what had to be done. We made the difficult decisions. Labor governments around the nation steered this country through some of its hardest times since the Second World War. Just imagine where we would be, where Western Australia would be, where Australia would be if the Liberals and Nationals and their fellow traveller, Clive Palmer, had been successful in their efforts to undermine our hard work. And can you believe that after all of that, the Liberals would still do a deal with Clive Palmer? There are no excuses for striking a preference deal like this with someone like Clive Palmer. To be that desperate and blatant, it's an insult to every Australian, and especially to every Western Australian. The Liberal Party has not learnt its lesson and has clearly lost its way. But on the other hand, over the past 2 years, Anthony Albanese always stood by Western Australia and supported us in the tough decisions we had to take. So this election, if you want a Prime Minister who will step up and take responsibility, who will stand up for Western Australia, vote Labor. If you want to see more things made in Australia with Australian jobs, vote Labor. If you want to see more young Australians get the skills they need for the opportunities they deserve, vote Labor. And if you want a future that's more affordable, where everyone gets a fair go and no one gets left behind, vote Labor. I've known Anthony for a long time. He's one of the most senior and experienced figures in the nation. He is resilient. He is authentic. He is the real deal. He has boundless energy. He is a fundamentally decent person, driven by empathy and a deep sense of civic responsibility. And I have every confidence he will make a fine Prime Minister and a great partner for Western Australia. Thank you very much.
Australia, we can do better. All it takes is a better government with better plans. Too many people are working multiple jobs just to keep their heads above water. We can do better than that. Too many of our kids aren't going to be able to buy a house. We can do better than that. Too many people in regional Australia can't get basic health care. We can do better than that. And our elderly are being mistreated every single day in a broken aged care system. We can do so much better than that. We have to. Your vote is powerful. Your vote can change things. Your vote can change Australia for the better.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to introduce the next Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese.
Well, thank you, Mark, for that kind introduction and for all that you have done to keep WA safe and strong. I look forward to working with you and all of our state premiers, including this bloke down the front here, Peter Malinauskas, who's here today and is already doing a fantastic job as the Premier of South Australia. But I want to work with all premiers, regardless of which party they come from, because I want to bring all the states together and get things done for the whole country. My fellow Australians, in just 20 days' time, you can vote for a better future. You can choose cheaper childcare, stronger Medicare, and fixing the crisis in aged care. Or you can have more of the same. Neglect, cuts, and a health minister who says Medicare is, to quote her, unsustainable. You can choose a future where Australia makes things here again, a stronger, more diverse, more self-reliant economy, or a government that dared the car industry to leave our country, and they did. You can vote for more secure work, better pay, and meaningful help with your cost of living, or a Prime Minister who says, it's not my job to lift wages. You can choose a government that seizes the opportunity for Australia to be a renewable energy superpower, driving new industries, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs in our regions, and acting on climate change. You can choose a government that recognises that national security is above politics and invests in cybersecurity, energy security, and real defence capabilities. You can choose to restore integrity to politics, to end the waste, and to end the rorts. And above all, you can choose a government that honours your values and rewards your hard work. A government that holds no one back and leaves no one behind. Now, I stand before you today seeking to lead that government and asking for your support to have the honour of serving as Prime Minister of the greatest country on earth. In the past 3 years, through the devastation of bushfires and floods and the once-in-a-century shock of a global pandemic, Australians have been simply magnificent. In the toughest of times, people have stepped up, but their government has let them down. I know Labor can do better, and I know Australians deserve better. And if you vote for a Labor government on the 21st of May, the work of building that better future will start the very next day. My fellow Australians, as we gather here in the great state of Western Australia, on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, I am proud to promise that our Labor government will work with First Nations people to implement the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. We will deliver a constitutionally enshrined voice to our Parliament. This will be an uplifting moment of healing and unity for our country, in the same spirit as the national apology to the stolen generations delivered by Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. And I do want to acknowledge two great Labor Prime Ministers here today, Paul Keating and Kevin Rudd. Two leaders who left lasting legacies, who changed Australia for the better, who never said, "It's not my job." I also acknowledge all the Labor members and senators and candidates here, and those campaigning right around the country. Now, it's fair to say that being at home in ISO wasn't my ideal way to spend the last week. But it did give me, and it gave the people of Australia as well, the chance to watch my brilliant Labor team in action. And I do have to confess, it also gave me a moment, just a moment, of sympathy for Scott Morrison. Don't worry, it passed quickly. You see, I know I can count on Penny and Richard, Katie and Jim, and so many others to make the arguments for Labor. But who's he got? Alan Tudge and Peter Dutton. The unspeakable and the unthinkable. And then, of course, there's Barnaby Joyce. The inexplicable. So to all of my colleagues, thank you for your support and your hard work over the last 3 years. Yeah, give them a clap. We are a team with the experience, the intellect, the compassion, but most importantly, the ambition to shape Australia's future. Because at the heart of it, that's what this election is all about. A better future for Australia. Now, the COVID pandemic has shown us the strength of our community, but it also revealed some of the vulnerabilities of our economy. The big question for Australia is, are we going to learn the lessons from this? Are we going to emerge stronger? Are we going to tackle rising costs and flat wages? Are we going to embark on a new era of economic reform with productivity growth at its centre? Are we going to strengthen our actual defence capability to meet the changing dynamic in our region? Are we going to strengthen our skills and training and manufacturing capacity to ensure we're not left isolated at the end of global supply chains? Are we going to seize this moment? Or are we going to, instead of going forward, just slide back? Are we going to risk 3 more wasted years? Now, Scott Morrison says you don't have to like him, but it's the better the devil you know. Well, here's what Australians do know. They know he failed on bushfires, and they know he then failed on floods. They know he didn't order enough vaccines and then didn't order enough rapid antigen tests. They know it's harder to see a doctor. They know aged care is in crisis. They know it's harder to buy a home and the cost of everything is going up, but their wages aren't. That's the devil you know. These problems didn't happen overnight. The government has had a decade in office, and in another 3 years, the problems that we need to fix will be even bigger. We can do better, but this is as good as it gets with this mob. My fellow Australians, Through the pandemic, our country enjoyed an extraordinary advantage. We could close our borders and seal ourselves off from the world. And there's no doubt that that was the right call, which is why I supported it. But let's be clear, that's just not an option for the challenges ahead. We live in a globalised world. Economic competition doesn't stop at national borders. Climate change doesn't respect lines on a map. Strategic threats in our region cannot be quarantined. The foreign policy failure over the Solomons is proof of that. Australia, if we stand still, we will be left behind. If we don't shape the future will shape us. Because make no mistake, climate change is here now. Our region is changing now. The jobs and skills and infrastructure that will grow our economy are needed now. There is a crisis in aged care right now. Families need lasting help with rising costs right now. Australia does not have 3 more years to waste. And that is why the choice you face is so important. It's so urgent and it is so clear. Because at this election, only Labor has a plan to seize this moment for Australia. Only Labor has a plan for a better future. And today I want to talk about 5 areas that my Labor team and I will focus on as we build a stronger, more productive and more resilient economy. The first of these is our Powering Australia plan, which will drive investment in cheap renewable energy. It will create 604,000 new jobs by 2030. 5 out of every 6 of those will be in our regions. It will put cities like Gladstone in the engine room of a new wave of economic growth. It will mean cheaper power for homes and businesses. We will end the climate wars. And our plan will help us protect our environment, our coasts, our farmland, our reef, our rivers, our forests. Because Australia's natural wonders, our unique species and our beautiful home must be left flourishing for future generations. But Powering Australia isn't just about the environment, it's not just about industry. It will deliver real benefits to Australian families too. Today I announced that Labor will build more electric vehicle charging stations across Australia so we can close the gaps that are there in the network. And that means you'll be able to drive an electric vehicle across the country, from Adelaide to Perth, from Brisbane to Mount Isa. Together with Labor's already announced electric vehicle discount, we'll make it easier and cheaper for your next car to be an electric one. Imagine a future where you don't have to worry about petrol bills. We can get there, but we need government to build the foundation for it. And yes, you can drive on the weekend too. Heavy vehicles too are moving towards cleaner energy, with hydrogen-powered freight vehicles in development. To prepare for them, we'll partner with the states to create hydrogen-ready highways, matching the investments state governments make. Secondly, I'm focused on a future made right here in Australia. We have such an abundance of natural resources in this country. Our resource exports will continue to provide critical national income for decades to come. But where possible, we need to do more than ship them overseas and import them back as finished products. Today I announce that as part of our National Reconstruction Fund, Labor will invest $1 billion in developing value-added products from Australian resources. We'll take resources like lithium and nickel, essential elements of the batteries that will power the vehicles of the future, and instead of shipping them to another country to make batteries, we'll have what we need to make them right here. And then we can sell them to the world. Here in Western Australia, but right around the country, we'll invest in local industries that create local jobs. We will bring manufacturing back home. Now, just yesterday, I announced that a Labor government will partner with Premier Mark McGowan to deliver a new electric vehicle manufacturing facility right here, more than 130 buses for Perth, just for starters, and essential upgrades and charging infrastructure. It's a great example of how innovation and good planning can hit the sweet spot, creating local jobs and industries and reducing our carbon emissions at the same time. Contrary to the fiction being peddled by the Liberals and the Nationals, tackling climate change and creating a strong local economy go hand in hand. Thirdly, we will invest in infrastructure to boost productivity and create jobs. We'll improve regional roads and major highways. We'll invest in better rail for freight and for commuters. And Labor will ensure that more Australians have access to high-speed broadband. Now, a government that I lead will also use the power of government purchasing to buy Australian. We'll make sure that the projects that we commission bring benefits to Australian companies and will help small and medium businesses compete for contracts, because we should be using the power of government to back our own people and our own businesses. That's why we will mandate that 1 out of every 10 jobs on federally funded work sites will be filled by apprentices or trainees. My fellow Australians, the 6 years that I had the honour of spending as Australia's first ever infrastructure minister were some of the most rewarding in my life, because I got to build things that are essential to a strong economy. Because in building things, you can see the power of government in action, making a real difference to people's lives. And you know that you're building to last, that the project that you commission today will serve future generations, just like Gateway WA and Perth CityLink are doing today. But under this government, nation building has been replaced by pork barrelling. Now, nowhere is that more disgracefully obvious than the $600 million allocated to commuter car parks, most of which have never even been built. Now, in some places for these commuter car parks, I'm not making this up, there wasn't actually a train station. No wonder it's known as the Pork and Ride Scheme. But just as with submarines, a huge bill with absolutely nothing to show for it. Now, Labor will put the focus back on nation-building infrastructure, using the Infrastructure Australia model that I created as minister. Now, the fourth element of our Better Future plan is in jobs and training. A Labor government will ensure a fair go at work extends to every Australian. Now, that means a fair day's wage for a fair day's work, a principle fought for by the trade union movement, which we celebrate today on May the 1st. An appropriate day for a Labor campaign launch, I thought. It means security, not working shift to shift, robbed of the chance to plan for the future. We can't continue to see permanent jobs replaced by insecure casual ones. Your bills aren't casual. People who want secure work need to be able to find it again. I believe that one of Australia's greatest untapped resources is the full and respectful economic participation of women. Now, under the Liberals, Australia has fallen to 70th in the world, 70th, for women's economic participation and opportunity. Labor has already committed to using all of the tools that we have in our power to close the gender pay gap. Today I announce that Labor will make gender pay equity an objective of the Fair Work Act. If you want to represent the whole country, best not to leave more than half of the country out of it. We will set up expert panels on pay equity and the care and community sector to help improve pay and conditions for women in those sectors. And I say this to people in this room, by those watching at home, that you all know that it was care workers who kept us alive through the pandemic. Care workers are the arteries of our nation, our regions, our cities, our suburbs. We must give them the respect and give them the investment that they deserve. Now, women workers have had a tough couple of years, and I want to tell you that we see you. We see the work you have done, both paid and unpaid. We appreciate it and we value it. But we need to do more than simply thank you and applaud you. We need to fix the persistent structural barriers that prevent so many women securing decent jobs and careers and financial security over the course of your lives. That will be a key focus of a government that I lead. Now, growing up, my mum always told me that a good education was my ticket to a better life. Education remains the most powerful weapon we have against disadvantage and the best investment we can make in the future of our country. That's why we're going to fund more university places and 465,000 fee-free places at public TAFEs. And we will create a new national authority, Jobs and Skills Australia, to ensure that the needs of the labour market can be met by Australians. A growing economy with more skilled workers for more good jobs. That's my vision. Now, the fifth component of Labor's plan for the future and economic reform is about care. Childcare, Medicare and aged care. It's only ever Labor governments who do the big reforms, drive the big changes, reshape the economy in the best interests of people. And we always do it by bringing people together. Whether it be family businesses and workers, big employers and trade unions, states and the Commonwealth, Bob Hawke and Paul Keating created Medicare and universal superannuation. Kevin Rudd created the National Broadband Network. Based on fibre, not copper, I might add. Julia Gillard created the National Disability Insurance Scheme with the critical support of Bill Shorten. These great reforms stand as markers of a decent society. They speak to the best of Australia's values. But as the party of economic reform, Labor understands that these programs are about more than simply doing the right thing by people, because they are also the drivers of a strong economy. They boost participation and they boost productivity. They take away costs that would otherwise be left to employers and businesses. Reliable, affordable, universal services are good for the economy because they arm people with the confidence to pursue their aspirations, to fulfil their potential. That's why Labor will defend universal superannuation and the right of every Australian to save for a secure retirement. It's why we will stop the Liberals' unfair cuts to the NDIS. And it's why Labor will always protect Medicare. It's why a Labor government will invest in urgent care clinics across the country, taking pressure off emergency departments and making it easier to see a doctor. Now, the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme is another of the great Australian institutions established by guess who? Labor. Always Labor. And it's tangible proof of our unwavering commitment to universal health care. Today I announce that Labor will make medicines cheaper for millions of Australians. We will reduce the cost of medications on the PBS by $12.50, making them cheaper for general patients. This means the maximum price for PBS medicines will be just $30. Because we know that the price of medications has gone up under the Morrison government, just like the cost to see a doctor has gone up. Medicare will always be stronger under Labor. And if you vote Labor on the 21st of May, we will bring the principles of universal, affordable and quality service to childcare and to aged care. Now, for too long, our youngest Australians and our oldest Australians and their families have lived with broken systems. The costs of childcare are simply unaffordable. The neglect in aged care is just unconscionable. We can do better than this. I will make it the Labor government's mission to do better than this and to fix this. Our plan for cheaper childcare will make childcare more affordable for 96% of families. Meaningful, ongoing help with the cost of living for families, not one-off handouts that stop when the votes are counted. Good policy on childcare is about increasing workforce participation. It's about productivity improvements. It's economic reform, not welfare, that grows the economy. And our plan to restore quality and humanity to aged care. Older Australians built this great nation. You deserve dignity and respect in your later years, not neglect. The one-word title of the government's own interim Royal Commission report. Just think about that. Neglect. Neglect. More carers with more time to care. A pay rise for aged care workers. Tastier, more nutritious meals for residents, drawing on the skills of the legendary Maggie Beer. New accountability and reporting measures, so every dollar that we invest goes to better care, not bigger profits. And critically, Labor will put the nurses back into nursing homes 24/7. Now, in our debate the other night, Scott Morrison mocked this plan, saying, to quote him, "Nurses won't fall out of the sky." Think about that for just a moment. You have a Royal Commission that he reluctantly established that has made these recommendations. That's where we got our policy from the recommendations of the Royal Commission. The Royal Commission outlined, page by page, line by line, thousands of heartbreaking accounts of misery, loneliness, abuse and neglect. A workforce at breaking point, a system in crisis, and he thinks it's somehow clever to say he's not even going to try to fix it. Not even going to try. But that is his way. That's his character. Whenever Australia needs a solution, he offers only smirk and mirrors. We can do better than this, so much better than this. We will look after the young. We will look after the sick. We will look after our older Australians. No one held back and no one left behind. My fellow Australians, this is my vision for a stronger economy with greater opportunity, with new investments in Australian skills and jobs and manufacturing and energy, with a new commitment to higher wages and more secure work, with new support for better education and training, and new plans for cheaper childcare and decent aged care. This is the economy I want to grow and build for our country, and an economy that makes it possible for more hard-working Australians to live in the security of a home that they own. Now, I'm so proud of the housing policies that we've announced before today. Our Housing Australia Future Fund will build 20,000 new social housing units and 10,000 affordable homes for essential workers in the next 5 years, as well as new housing for homeless veterans. We will provide $100 million for crisis and transitional housing for women and children at risk of violence, because too many women are being turned away by under-resourced shelters with no room, forcing women and their kids to sleep in their cars on couches, or worse, return to dangerous situations. It happens every single night in this country. And today, I'm proud to announce a new policy that will reward the hard work and support the aspirations of more Australians. A plan to help more working families realise the dream of owning their own home. A plan that invests in Australia's greatest asset, our people, that helps put more Australians on the path to the life that they dream about. For too long, Australians who have worked hard have been locked out of the housing market by flat wages and rising prices, unable to even get a foot in the door, let alone their own roof over their heads. Parents I speak to say they don't think their kids will ever have the opportunity of home ownership that my generation had our parents encourage us to do. We can do better than this. A Labor government will create a new Help to Buy program, a national shared equity scheme that will provide an equity contribution from the Commonwealth for 10,000 aspiring homeowners on low and middle incomes each and every year. Now, if you have saved 2% of your deposit, we will contribute up to 40% of the purchase price of a new home or 30% of an existing home. Help to Buy will assist Australians to buy a home with a smaller deposit, a smaller mortgage and smaller mortgage repayments. An Australian Labor government will help you achieve the great Australian dream of home ownership. It's a plan to put government to work, backing up and investing in everyday people, because that's what good government should do. I know what a difference a secure roof over your head can make, a place to call home. It's so much more than an aspiration to get on the property ladder. It's a sense of security and confidence. It brings hope and pride and belonging. I want to build a better future, and I want to help more Australians own a stake in it. Help to Buy is exactly what I mean when I talk about an economy that works for people rather than people just working for an economy. But I know full well that housing affordability and security are not problems that can be solved by the Commonwealth Government alone. We need to work in partnership with government at all levels, local councils, state governments and the Commonwealth coming together and working with the private sector to put all the tools at our disposal to work. And that's why I'm announcing that Labor will establish a National Housing Supply and Affordability Council. Fixing land supply and planning will improve housing affordability and boost economic growth. The council will bring together state, territory and local governments to encourage land release and to cut red tape. My fellow Australians, this is our comprehensive and targeted plan for a stronger economy and a better society, because we can do better than this. Labor has real, lasting plans for cheaper electricity, cheaper childcare, cheaper mortgages, cheaper medicines and Medicare, and for better pay. We can do better than 3 more years of the government that's brought us skyrocketing costs of living and falling real wages. We have the worst inflation rate in 2 decades. Families are struggling, worried about the future. Yet Scott Morrison just keeps on scrambling from one photo op to another, boasting that the Australian people know who he is. Well, he's got that right. They don't think, they know. People know Scott Morrison goes missing when the going gets tough. People know Scott Morrison's response to the bushfire crisis was a dismissive, "I don't hold a hose, mate." People know he said it isn't a race to bring vaccines to Australia. People know he said that if you can't afford your rent, just buy a house. I reckon people know all about Scott Morrison. They've worked him out. Australians understand that we can't bet our future on 3 more years of a Prime Minister who looks at every challenge facing our country and says, "That's not my job." For a decade now, the Liberals and Nationals have treated governing as an inconvenience and public money as a political slush fund. If you vote Labor, we'll change this. A Labor government will restore trust and accountability to national politics with a National Anti-Corruption Commission. And I commit to this. As your Prime Minister, I won't run from responsibility. I won't treat every crisis as a chance to blame someone else. I will show up, I will step up, and I will bring people together. I will lead with integrity, and I will treat you with the respect that you deserve. My fellow Australians, the decision that you have to make at this election is not just a choice between Labor and Liberal. It's a choice between shaping the future or being shaped by it. I know we have been through tough times. I know the sacrifices that so many of you have made. You have earned a better future, and on the 21st of May, I am asking you to vote for that better future. Vote for universal health care through Medicare. Vote for cheaper childcare and cheaper energy bills. Vote for secure jobs and higher wages. Vote for strengthening our universities and TAFEs. Vote for action on climate change. Vote for dignity and respect for older Australians. Vote for an Australia that makes things here and stands on our own 2 feet. Vote to keep our nation secure. Vote for an Australia that is confident and respected in the world. Vote for a country that celebrates our success as a multicultural nation. Vote for an Australia that recognises the great privilege of sharing our vast continent with the oldest continuous culture on earth. Vote for an Australia that believes the doors of opportunity should be open to every Australian, no matter where you live, who you pray to or who you love. Vote for hope and optimism, not fear and division. Vote Labor so together we can build a better future for all Australians. Thank you very much.
grace and the encouragement of Labor Party members here in Western Australia, the May Day appeal by Anthony Albanese, launching his bid officially to become Australia's 31st Prime Minister, here at the Perth Stadium as he makes his exit, greeting Mark McGowan, who had introduced him, Peter Malinauskas, the South Australian Premier, his own front benchers, Paul Keating and Kevin Rudd, two in the room who know exactly the mountain that Anthony Albanese is trying to climb. Perhaps Bill Shorten appreciates that too, although unsuccessful on two occasions in his case, and National President Wayne Swan. He'll soon make his way out of the venue, and our coverage on ABC News will continue for some time. We will be joined by a number of Labor frontbenchers to talk about some of the announcements embedded in that speech. They were not sweeping and not especially expensive, but there are a number of themes to be teased out in our analysis of this campaign launch by the ALP, and we're about to do that in a moment with our political editor, Andrew Probyn. And yes, there leaveth the leader from the launch venue. Andrew Probyn, very strong on the Labor values, but not just that, this over-the-horizon view that Labor is prepared to tackle long-term issues. Insert name, climate change for one, health, aged care, childcare, cost of living. I mean, many of these would transcend, or could well transcend, one term of government.
And all under the banner of a better future. I think that's the big story here. He's trying to offer that vision that perhaps is lacking in the government's proposals. There's been very much a focus on the experience, the pandemic, the experience. This fellow, the Labor leader, is now offering something else, a better future, he says. Now, there was concerns inside Labor ranks that emerging from COVID he would be somewhat lacking energy, but I think that was a pretty good speech, full of energy, full of conviction. 5 key themes: energy, manufacturing, infrastructure, gender pay equity, and then the care economy. Medicare, aged care, childcare, the big pitch. Childcare especially the big pitch. That's probably, of all of the reforms that they're offering, the one that can actually generate some real cost of living alleviation. Yeah, they're the 5 pillars that I think this whole campaign strategy has been built upon, and then under some of those headings he was able to offer a few new announcements. Some of them are a little bureaucratic, such as, but worthy nonetheless, setting up a national approach to land supply to try to fix housing affordability, but also throwing some cash down as future promises as well, with things like the housing shared equity scheme that's been announced. That carries a cost over the next 4 years of just under $330 million, and it would see the government, the federal government in this case, going in as an equity partner for 10,000 Australians who might be seeking to purchase a property. And we also saw them matching and then bettering what the government's offered when it comes to the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, slashing the expectation that you would pay $42.50 for every script you receive at a pharmacist, and having to pay instead $30, so $12.50 saving for each script. That is, they're saying about on average about $150 saving to individuals. This is interesting. So there was an indication yesterday that would indeed be the case.
So just tease it out. I mean, how does this mechanism work? Because it's not unlimited. You don't, well, the prices come down, but your access to that safety net that catches you and protects you from really big expenses on the pharmaceutical side, that is affected in some way by this?
Well, if you're a concession card holder, I think you pay $6.60 for every script, but if you exceed something like $330, it becomes effectively free. Now, the safety net for general patients, that is non-concession card holders, it's in the order of $1,570. Now, Labor's saying there that, or in the details of, not in the speech, but in the details of the policy, that those thresholds would remain the same. So, in effect, by my calculations, instead of 36 scripts if you're a general patient, you'd have to rack up 51. So, look, it is obviously that is the backup, but the point being that for most Australians there will be a saving there.
Yeah, we might tease some of that out with Mark Butler. He's due to join us a little later. We will continue our coverage for quite some time because, as we've already flagged, there are a number of frontbenchers who have indicated they'll make their way here. To do that, of course, Anthony Albanese and the VIP contingent need to leave the auditorium venue, which is up a floor or two here at the stadium, and then make their way down onto the main concourse. But already we're seeing party members here from Western Australia making their way out of the venue on what is a fairly historic choice by Labor. Not since World War II under John Curtin was a campaign launched from the West, and even then, probes, it was via radio.
Via radio. Well, this is well beyond the days of radio now, where we heard from various folk about the Labor campaign, the coalition campaign. We have campaigns now that are largely subterranean, in a sense that a lot of campaigning is done on social media. A lot of us don't actually see all of the campaigns. This is a moment that's meant to capture some of that energy, to throw Anthony Albanese in the national spotlight, to explain who he is and what they stand for.
Yeah, and look, he did that pretty effectively. A couple of gags on the way in from Jason, Clare and Mark McGowan, and then there was this kind of trajectory of building confidence and expression coming through Anthony Albanese himself. Certainly he looked like he was hitting the high notes towards the end, even if it was a bit gentle and slow in the build-up right off the bat.
Real emphasis on team too, wasn't there? Yeah. He said at one point that he felt sorry for Scott Morrison, albeit briefly, when he was in COVID, because he knew that he had a strong team to back him up, and then who's he got? He said Alan Tudge and Peter Dutton. He just described them as the unspeakable and as the unthinkable. That's rather unkind, isn't it?
Well, except it got worse when he brought in Barnaby Joyce and described him as the inexplicable. They were strong on the jibes against the current government, but you'd expect that in a gathering of the party members here in Western Australia. So, look, we'll get into the ins and outs of various policy pronouncements with them in a moment, but in case we run out of time, the next step for Anthony Albanese is actually going to be a very rapid one. He's going to leave Perth, as we understand it, fairly quickly, having only arrived here late on Friday. The campaign bus does not stop.
I understand he's off to Queensland, so there's a lot of work to be done all around the country for both sides. Labor has a pretty tough ask, it must be said, in Queensland. There's a sense that they could pick up 1 or 2 seats, but there is also the view that they might not pick any in Queensland.
Which would be, a rather rude awakening, wouldn't it, on the 21st of May. But yes, we've been able to secure the first of our front benches straight out of the auditorium. Joining us in just a moment now will be Mark Butler, and we'll be able to talk through the policy initiatives. In fact, I think he's pretty much ready now. Probes, take it away.
Now, explain this cut to the...
well,
yes, hello.
Not quite Paul Keating.
You didn't reach your arm out there. You didn't spring up behind us, but...
a seamless integration, nonetheless.
Mike Butley, you were intimating yesterday that you would be matching, if not bettering, what the government's put forward when it comes to slashing the pharmaceutical benefits scheme expectations, both the general payment. What is the thinking here?
Well, I think we're focused on two things which are core to Labor's campaign and core to Labor's long-term mission, which is easing pressure on household budgets and the universality of healthcare, the importance of affordable healthcare. And I think what we've found, particularly talking to community pharmacists and to patient groups, is that the general patient payment for medicines has just got too high. If you compare other countries, a $42.50 script payment for many families, particularly middle-income families, if they need more than one medicine, is really putting pressure on their household budget. So,
in fact, the message coming to you and to the government was that it was so high some people weren't filling the scripts at all. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, you can look at ABS stats, so Bureau of Statistics stats, as well as other sector-based stats, show that hundreds of thousands of people aren't accessing the medicines that their doctors say they need simply because of cost. They're choosing which of their medicines, their blood pressure or their cholesterol medicine, for example. So if you've got a number of members of your family who need medicines to keep you healthy, this is a core issue of equity and of universality of healthcare.
So just run us through, because they weren't spelled out in great length in the leader's speech. Just run us through the bare numbers. So you bring it down $10. Overall budget cost
$12.50.
$12.50. Sorry. Overall cost to the budget. And when would it take effect?
Well, it will take effect on the 1st of January. The costings will be released in the usual time, but this is a fully costed policy, as I assume the government's was as well. But we'll bring it down from $42.50 to $30. That will be the maximum payment for a general patient for their medicines.
One thing you're not changing, correct me if I'm wrong, is the safety net. So the safety net for concession card holders is $326. $1,542 for general patients. Now, that means that you would effectively have to fill more scripts under the cheaper co-payment than you would under the old. Why not bring down the safety net?
Well, we can't do everything, obviously, and the vast bulk of people don't reach their safety net. So a $30 maximum script price, even if all of your medicines are at that maximum price, and many aren't, many are below $30, you'd have to have dozens and dozens of scripts to get to that safety net payment. So we think the focus, we've taken advice on this from patient groups and from the community pharmacy sector. We think the priority is to get that script price down, and that's what we've committed to do today.
There was a lot of focus today on the care economy. Disability care wasn't mentioned as part of the care, although it has been a subject of a lot of Labor talk. I know you're not technically the shadow in charge of the NDIS, but there is the sustainability question when it comes to the NDIS. The federal budget saying that it's going to get to something like $70 billion a year by 2032. What's Labor going to do to ensure that the NDIS is sustainable?
Well, Labor created the NDIS. Bill Shorten in particular was a critical part of creating the NDIS, and it's been one of the great reforms of the last couple of decades. It's changed lives. It's genuinely changed lives for people and families living with a disability. And what we'll do is bring that energy, bring that commitment back to making sure that the NDIS works for all Australians.
Doesn't answer the question though, because the NDIS is exploding in costs way more than expected.
What we will do is make sure that this reflects the level of hope and ambition that our government had, but also families living with a disability had, to make sure that plans put in place with a properly staffed agency give them the hope and the opportunity to participate in Australian life. And what we'll see with Bill Shorten, the person who did more than anyone else to create the NDIS, is someone with the energy and the commitment to make this a really wonderful, deeply entrenched part of Australian life.
Although at the margins, I mean, some of the reviews go to consultants, the use of appeals to the AAT. None of those tackle, and if you look in the budget papers, it's a pretty steep curve. None of those go to the heart of the big costs that are coming.
Well, sure. Look, this will be a big part of our next agenda. I can tell you as a local member, this is not my area of responsibility ministerially, but as a local member, NDIS is one of the biggest complaints I have from families who had so much hope but are confronting a government that's focused on bureaucratic inertia and cuts being made to their plans. We will restore the hope that was there in the initial reform to create an NDIS in the first place.
Do you concede, though, that the very steep increase in the NDIS speaks of a system that's got some significant problems?
Well, we haven't seen a minister be able to spend the time and the commitment on making sure that this still relatively new social service, still only about 10 years old, is able to fulfil the promise that its creation gave to hundreds of thousands of families. That's what you'll see from an Albanese Labor government, the sort of sense of focus, the sense of commitment to making sure this reform works for people.
Why don't we step it back, because you are the first front bencher to join us after the leader's speech, the general dynamic of the campaign. What was the essence, what was the mood that you wanted to convey, or Anthony Albanese had to convey to voters in the Broad today?
Well, this campaign is focused on hope, that we can build a better future after a terrible few years that we've all experienced across Australia with a once-in-a-century pandemic and just a spate of natural disasters that have really hit local communities very hard. We don't want to go back to some of the things that really did afflict Australian society before that 3 years of natural disaster and pandemic. We want to build a better future, and that's Anthony Albanese's commitment. It's a commitment to building more things here in Australia. It's a commitment to fixing the aged care crisis. It's a commitment to strengthening Medicare. But what Anthony's story today, what his pitch to the Australian people really focused on, was that he will be a leader who steps up, who takes responsibility, who doesn't blame others when things go wrong.
In your home state, there's always talk about Boothby. Will it or won't it fall? Labor's had high ambition before. This time around, what's your sense?
Well, I think as a South Australian, I think it's the 1940s was the last time we held Boothby. So as a local, we never underestimate the size of the mountain to climb to hold Boothby. But boundaries change, moods change. I think in South Australia, there's a real mood for change at a federal level. They want to see a government in place that's going to fix some of those crises in the aged care sector and Medicare that I've just been talking about. That they want to see a Prime Minister who steps up instead of trying to shift responsibility to others and pretending these things aren't his job.
You use the word change. Penny Wong, a couple of others in the campaign launch that we've just seen have talked about Labor being the party of grand reform. Is there reform that we haven't been told about that you expect there to be?
Well, I think the story Anthony has been talking about now for the entire period of his leadership, and he talked about it again today, is one of safe change. I think people have had a tough 2 or 3 years. They want to build a better future, but they want a Prime Minister and a government in whom they have confidence, whom they think is authentic, who is going to end the mistakes and the rorts and take responsibility. They're not looking for the country to be shaken up. They're looking for safe change to fix some of these endemic problems which were apparent before the pandemic and have become even more apparent now.
Safe change, yeah, that's rather modest in its ambition, though, just finally, if you can make some sort of comparison, you've been through a few disappointments in the last 2 elections. Is there a deliberate attempt to try to manage expectations this time around?
Well, I don't
Sounds like it when you use a phrase like safe change.
Well, I don't think any of us in Labor underestimate the challenge of winning at a federal level. We've only done it 3 times since the war. We know it's a particularly difficult mountain to climb for Labor at a federal level. It's easier at a state level, it would appear, but it is a challenge. But we're up for this challenge, and I know Anthony is up for this challenge. You saw that in the room with the energy that he brought. An energy that reflects, I think, the energy that Labor has here in Western Australia, which is why it's been so wonderful to be here for the first time for our campaign launch here. You saw that energy exuded by the Premier, Mark McGowan, as well, and you just know that a federal Labor government under Anthony Albanese will be able to work in partnership, not just with Labor governments like Mark McGowan's, but state governments across the country. And I think that's what the Australian people want. Coming out of this pandemic, they want more unity, more of a sense of cooperation than the division we've too often seen over the last couple of years.
All right, well, Mark Butler, you have your own campaign to wage back in South Australia before too long, I'm sure. So thanks for joining us this afternoon in our rolling coverage of this launch. And since he mentions Mark McGowan, why don't we actually hear from the WA Premier? He spoke just a moment ago.
Anthony stands on his own 2 feet. He's a quality act, and as you saw, a deeply committed person who I think will do a great job for Australia.
The Labor brand is very, very strong in WA right now. Could it be the election that you finally end the Liberals' dominance here at a federal level?
Well, I hope so. Great candidates, a great team. The shadow cabinet is very talented, and Anthony has a deep commitment to Western Australia, which he's shown over many years. So. And I'd work well with Anthony.
There are reports in 2019 you felt a bit burnt that you spent a lot of political capital trying to get Bill Shorten elected. It didn't really pay off. Are you going to be all in on this campaign to get Anthony Albanese elected?
Well, I introduced him at the campaign launch in Perth. That's a pretty strong contribution. This is the first campaign launch in 80 years in Western Australia, so that's a pretty big contribution, and I think a pretty big commitment to WA.
OK, so our political reporter Jane Norman there wrangling Mark McGowan, the West Australian Premier, and in many ways the host, I suppose, of this Labor launch. Certainly the man who finally got to introduce Anthony Albanese. Before him, though, a couple of speakers before him, was none other than Senate Leader Penny Wong, who's joining us now from Perth Stadium. Welcome, Senator.
Good to be with you.
Why don't we ask the general overview question first of all? What are we most to take out of the leader's speech?
Oh, I think hope. A sense of optimism and hope, and a positive plan to deliver a better future for Australians. But I think overwhelmingly it was a launch that was focused on what people want and hope for a better future.
We heard before from Mark Butler that Labor's offering safe change. In your speech, you talked about sort of the grand changes that Labor has made. They're slightly conflicting, aren't they? The message that you're the great reforming party.
I think, well, that's your opinion. I don't think that's correct. And I think what we've seen in this campaign, you know, we recognise the fiscal circumstances that the country faces, but we've been very clear about how we would prioritise our investment. We've said very clearly, powering Australia matters, tackling climate change, cheaper energy, making sure we've got the capacity to generate new advanced manufacturing. That matters. Doing more manufacturing here in Australia, and of course childcare. That's a big reform, as is aged care. So there are plenty of reforming policies in the announcements today and that we have made. But I think, as importantly, it's about what is the way in which you face the future. Do you allow as Anthony said, you can either be shaped by the future or you can shape it. And what Labor wants to do is shape the future, which is what Labor governments have always done.
The future, it might be one thing, but the past, recent past at least, has been dominated by our relationship with China. Should Labor win on May 21, what will you be doing first when it comes to, say, the challenges in the Solomons, the challenges with the China relationship?
Oh, well, I've said many times, in fact, for a couple of years, that we have structural differences in our relationship with China. We have different interests, different values, and whoever wins on 21st of May will have to sensibly, calmly and consistently manage those differences. I can say this to people, Labor would never take a backward step when it comes to standing up for Australia's interests and Australia's values.
What does that look like when it comes to the Solomon Islands?
Well, I tell you what it doesn't look like, Andrew, and I hope you're holding the government to account on this. What it doesn't look like is allowing what has happened on their watch to occur without any demonstrable evidence that they've actually engaged in a way that Pacific leaders respect. And I've talked at length about this previously, and I'm happy to talk about it on another occasion, but the reality is we had a Prime Minister who dropped the ball when it came to the Pacific, and we will all live with the consequences of that, and we will seek to deal with that as consistently and calmly as we are able, if we are to be elected.
We saw a remarkable speech to the Solomons Parliament from Manasseh Sogavare. He was accused effectively by Prime Minister Scott Morrison of using China notes effectively being a puppet for Beijing. How did you see that speech and that intervention?
Well, I think Mr Morrison's consistent approach on foreign policy has been to put domestic politics first. And you can see that over and over again, and that has been to the detriment of the nation.
Are you concerned at least by the rhetoric from Sogavare?
Yeah, I saw that speech. Obviously there's a lot in it we may not agree on. But what I would say, I'll tell you what else I don't agree on. I don't agree on the coalition government and Mr Morrison being so dismissive of climate change when Pacific leaders have consistently said this is their number one national security issue. I don't agree with the way in which Mr Morrison has taken his eye off the ball, and I don't agree that he has been a Prime Minister who has consistently looked to national interest. I think he has played to the domestic politics over and over again. We announced a Pacific package. It essentially looks to leverage Australia's strength, including the power of proximity, and that is a very important set of policies going forward.
Don't want to spend too long on foreign relations, but national security was, of course, addressed in Anthony Albanese's speech. But just finally on the Solomons, in light of that parliamentary speech by Manasseh Sogavare, trust is, of course, central to all of these international relations. Has the Solomons PM done or said anything which, to you as a foreign minister, might impinge on the degree of trust you would have in him as an interlocutor?
Well, we secure our nation in these times by ensuring we work to shore up our region, which means we have to work with all nations, all sovereign nations in our region, and that is, were we to be elected, that is what we would do. I think we have never got over, in my view, and others may disagree, but we've never got over Peter Dutton making a joke about water lapping at people's doors with Mr Morrison standing next to him. Yeah.
Now, you've made that point before. Why don't we bring you back to the campaign launch itself and the campaign that lies ahead. One point we were discussing with Katie Gallagher a little earlier, the timing of this exercise. Could you argue...
Which is the exercise? You mean the launch?
The launch.
It's a launch, it's not an exercise.
But it has to be done at some time. You've gone rather early, 3 weeks out.
It's a great place to be to launch. It's the first time in a very long time, I think, a campaign's been launched for the Labor Party in Western Australia. And we're very pleased and grateful that Mark McGowan has been so supportive. He's obviously a Premier with a great deal of authority.
Does the calculus towards 7 seats have to entail gains in Western Australia?
I think anyone can look at the electoral map and work out where we might gain 7
You'll
seats.
Take them anywhere,
but what I guess what I'd say is this is a tough election. We are in a tough environment. It is a tough fight. Mr Morrison and his cohort will become increasingly shrill and desperate, and we've seen that in recent days. And people will be subjected to an ongoing set of campaigns around that. My only point is this, I'd say to Australians, you have an opportunity to choose. You have an opportunity to choose what sort of future you want, and don't allow the cynicism of some of the commentary or the cynicism of some politicians to detract from that truth, which is you do have an opportunity to choose what sort of future you want.
So what sort of lesson can be learned from Peter Malinauskas' victory in South Australia at a federal level?
Hope matters, optimism matters, and people care about health.
So this is today all about the vision, the building a better future. Is this striking the contrast?
I look at Mr Morrison each day and I think, this man's pitch is more of the same. And I think it is that, time that Australians got a government and a leader who match the sort of courage and decency we've seen from Australians over these last few years, and we're asking for the opportunity to provide that.
Well, that's the challenge that lies ahead. 3 weeks left to run at Penny Wong, and I'm sure you've got plenty of commitments to get to today yourself, but for sparing us a few minutes of your time,
good to be with you,
really appreciate it, and we'll farewell you there. In a moment we will actually be talking to the Premier from your state, Peter Malinauskas. We'll bring him in just a moment. But Probes, yes, this theme of hope, I suppose, is the one that Labor frontbenchers are trying to impress upon us as crucial to the pitch here.
Yeah, hope, but also the future. This has been a very awful and difficult time for many Australians the last couple of years. It's one that kind of feeds this this device, I suppose, to pitch at what's next. Beyond May 21, I say device in a, I don't mean to, in a...
Well, it's the construction of arguments,
yeah.
Isn't it? That's essentially what an election is. But hope, as you pointed out, is then set off against, safe change. There's a bit of a disconnect there on face value.
Especially when the Labor Party has been talking very proudly about its reformist past. That the idea there, but that Labor wants to not only win government but do something with it. So safe change doesn't ring quite in the same way as that, but they're sort of safe improvement at this stage, aren't they?
Yeah, well, fans of the US comedy Veep would be familiar with the campaign slogan there, which is continuity with change. It sounds a little bit like that to me. But anyway, if we want to talk about electoral success, why don't we talk to a practitioner who has recently achieved some? And we welcome to our coverage here on the ABC News Channel, South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas. Thanks so much for joining us. You've had more than your own share of campaign launches in recent times, this time as a spectator only. What do you think?
I thought it was fantastic. You could certainly feel an energy in the room, Greg and Andrew, that was certainly palpable. Hopefully that came across on people's television sets. But what you saw was a speech from a future Prime Minister that has got a clear vision about bringing the country together, and I think that the nation is certainly yearning for that at the moment, particularly post the pandemic.
What do you think was your secret with your election victory?
I don't know if there's any particular secrets. I think you've got to have a vision for the future. You've got to have a policy that underpins that. And I think we're seeing that from Albo. There were some significant policy announcements today on the back of others in the past. And I just take the view, Andrew, that we are in a unique time. I mean, we haven't gone through a global pandemic before. It has literally shaken us to the core. And the nation wants to see a vision out of the back of that. They want to know what is the legacy of COVID going to be. And I think Anthony and the team have a vision for that.
Mark Butler was using the phrase safe change. There was something unsafe about the 2019 manifesto brought by Bill Shorten?
Well, the Australian people went to that election and decided to re-elect the Morrison government, and I think this is a different election. Something that I've pondered on a bit, and I sort of was subject to this throughout the course of our campaign. People always try and compare your current campaign to others before them when every election is different. We've got a completely set of new circumstances here, and what we see is a leader in Anthony with a vision and a policy and a team to deliver it that actually reflects the times we now live in. And more than anything, people do want to see the country come together, and I don't see any alternative how to achieve that apart from changing the federal government.
So you obviously smashed the theory of incumbency being a major benefit to sitting leaders. How does that manifest itself in the federal sphere, do you think?
Well, I do think incumbency is a major advantage to the government of the day, and that is particularly true in the world that we live in at the moment. We shouldn't be under any illusions about that. There is a massive starting advantage that the coalition have. And that's why the challenge before federal Labor is substantial. But they've now got a policy and a vision and a united team to be able to give us the best chance of victory. And I think today's speech is a demonstration of that.
Your home state, South Australia, there's one key seat there, Boothby. Tell us what happened in 2019. Was there a phone call made to you about what was going to happen in Boothby? What was the advice that you gave Labor federally?
Well, I always thought at the 2019 election that Boothby was going to be close, and it turned out it was very close. It's a very marginal seat now. And I suspect the same will be true again. Boothby is a hard seat to change. It's one that Labor has chased in South Australia for a long time. We've never quite been able to drink the water, but I'm hopeful we can this time. And I think there's a positive campaign on the ground, and our local candidate in Louise Miller-Frost is a star.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Premier, but I understand that in 2019 you didn't think that Labor would pick up Boothby. Do you think something opposite now?
I think that we can win Boothby. I think it's tough. We haven't held it since the 1940s, so this is a big ask. But if there ever a set of circumstances that lend themselves to us winning Boothby, it's certainly in this election. We've got the right candidate, we've got the right leader, we've got a yearning for change, and I'm hopeful that we can change the seat of Boothby.
How has the pandemic changed politics in the broad?
I think that the pandemic has given us a moment of pause as a nation to reflect on what's really important to us. And I think at the moment, now more than pretty much any other time in the last 20 years, there's a sense within the electorate that, well, we've got this escalating debt. What is the legacy of that going to be for our children? Because if it isn't going to be a better future, then what are we doing? So we need a policy that is about a better future, and the policies that we've seen from federal Labor, particularly around childcare, are important to me. More free TAFE places, more university places. That looks like a plan for the future that South Australians want to get behind.
It's a plan, but they're big and broad themes. Again, not to labour the comparisons with your own campaign, but you were relentlessly targeted. I mean, largely on health and ramping around the hospitals. There's a world of difference between those two pictures. What tells you that there's a crossover, that the mood for change in South Australia is going to transfer federally?
Well, I come back to that core point.
Narrow campaign, broad campaign.
Yeah, but I mean, the broad campaign reflects the fact that this is a change of government at a federal level. I mean, hospitals and health service delivery are a principal responsibility of the states. What we've got here is a national campaign on a national context, on a national platform.
Sure.
And you need a policy to reflect that, and that's what we now see from federal Labor.
You sit here in Perth, this fine state is going to get $2.5 billion in extra GST in the coming financial year.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. Scott Morrison said he delivered this to WA. He says other states are not going to lose out. But
Well,
this GST deal comes at a time when the West Australian government is going to be in surplus by $7 to $8 billion this year. Mark McGowan is celebrating this fact. What do you think of that?
Well, I think Scott Morrison dudded the people of South Australia in that GST deal, and he needs to put his hand up and accept responsibility of that. We're set to be approximately $250 to $290 million per annum worse off in recurrent funding through that GST deal when the top-up runs out, and that's not that far away. Now, that leaves my state in a materially worse position to be able to deliver the critical services that people want, particularly in health. So something's got to change, right? Something's got to give, because it doesn't make sense, the changes that were made, and I'm going to stand up for my state's interests.
We've heard from West Australian MPs today heartily defending this 70 cents floor.
Sure.
What are you going to be saying to Anthony Albanese should he become Prime Minister when it comes to this GST deal?
Exactly what I'm saying to the federal coalition now, that this top-up arrangement can't just end overnight in a couple of years' time and leave our state to the tune of $290 million a year worse off. It's not okay.
Have you already run that past either Anthony Albanese or Jim Chalmers? Because I don't, on their public statements, hear any great support for your position so far.
No, there isn't. Just as there wasn't towards Mark McGowan and Colin Barnett's position on the GST floor arrangement. What they did was they campaigned, they used the power of politics, they used the power of their premierships to argue the case for change, and I intend to do the same.
Fair enough. Peter Malinauskas, thanks so much for joining us on our ABC News coverage of the federal ALP launch here. He's certainly a person who knows what it takes to win elections, and did so in very recent order indeed. Probes.
Absolutely, but I think those last few comments on the GST speaks of trouble at mill.
Yeah.
We have got premiers of the same colour, red, at war effectively over the GST now.
But they'd also find allies in other premiers of a blue stripe.
Yes.
Tasmania would be one.
No, and of course the GST deal was struck before a pandemic. Now, WA always thought that it was being dudded by the GST deal. It's been long discussed. The question now, though, once you've had a pandemic exacerbating the differences between a state that can be many, many tens of billions in the red and a state like WA being very much in the black, and yet getting extra cash along.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's probably a bit more of an intra-ALP argument looking into the future, because there aren't too many blue premiers left on the electoral map around Australia. Why don't we bring into our coverage now fellow frontbencher, or another frontbencher really, Jason Clare's with us for our coverage, and also shadow housing, as well as party campaign spokesman. So
which you seem to have enjoyed this role of yours.
I'm doing my best, pitching in. We've got a great team. I'm just one part of it.
And your announcement today, or reflected by Anthony Albanese's speech, is substantial within your portfolio, $300 million. A couple of technical questions. When would it start?
It'll start on the 1st of January next year. We've got to get busy on this. We've got a housing crisis right now, Greg, you know it. Prices have gone up by 25% right across the country just in the last year. We're seeing lots of Aussies still take the plunge, trying to save a deposit, get a mortgage, but lots of other Australians are missing out. And in particular, it's younger people on lower incomes. Back 40 years ago, when Bob Hawke was the Prime Minister of Australia, about 60% of people in their 20s and 30s on lower incomes owned a house. Now that's only 28%. So you're seeing our country sort of cleave in half here between people who own a home and people who are going to rent for the rest of their life. What this policy is about is helping them, helping people to be able to buy a home with a smaller mortgage rather than renting for the rest of their life.
Well, the concern, I imagine, from some would be that you're going to be adding more heat to an overheating market. How do you stop that? Well,
The research that the Grattan Institute has done shows that there'll be very little impact there. We're talking about
$5 billion
10,000, but
you're
talking about 10,000 homes in a market where 600,000 homes are bought and sold every year. And you're also talking about people who otherwise wouldn't be in the market at all. I talked about young people, but let me give you another example, because this isn't just for first home buyers. It's for people on low incomes that don't otherwise own a home. And one of those groups are people who get divorced. I think 34% of women and 42% of men who get divorced and sell the home buy another home within 5 years. Often they're renting for the rest of their life and finding themselves in poverty in retirement. A policy like this, Grattan talks about this, it helped us in crafting this policy, is designed to help them. Now they've got enough money for a deposit because they've sold the family home, but the bank won't give them a mortgage because they're not going to be in the workforce long enough. A smaller mortgage with government equity investment helps them to retire owning a home rather than renting.
How do you prioritise or choose among what may well be an oversubscribed program when you're selecting 10,000 people?
Yeah, and we've got the benefit of knowing that this scheme's been in place here in WA for 30 years. So we know it works. It's called Key Start. It's a ripper program. Not just does it help people into their homes, but it makes money for the government. So it helps people to buy a home, but in the long term it makes money for taxpayers as well. The Victorians
How much
have just...
do you reckon?
Well, I wouldn't put a number on it now, but if you look at the UK scheme, you're seeing a 10% return on investment within, I think, 10 years. So it's good for the economy, good for taxpayers, good for people who want to buy a home. Interestingly, in Victoria, that's trialled this for the last 2 years and are now ramping it up. 1 in 6 people that have got in on the program have bought the government equity out within 2 years. And one thing we've done different with this, taking up the Tasmanian model, is we'll give you 30% equity if you buy an existing home, but we'll give you 40% equity if you're going to build a new home. So that's about helping on the supply side, helping to build more houses, not just buy existing houses.
Now, it's not a free ride, because if your circumstances do improve, do you have to start buying the government's equity?
Yeah,
and how would that work?
Yeah, good question. Again, we've picked up the Victorian model that says that if your income goes up, or you might marry someone and they go on the title, then you've got 2 years grace period, and then there's obligations to start buying the government's equity in 5% increments. So we've picked out the best bits of the WA scheme, the Victorian scheme, the Tasmanian scheme, even looking at what the POMs are doing here. But the central objective here is to help people who otherwise would rent for the rest of their life. Let me give you a real life example. A woman called Angela on the Central Coast who I met last year. Works in the local canteen at the local school. Her husband is a tradie on the Central Coast. She said, look, we've got 3 kids. I want to buy a house. The house we want to buy is $1 million. The bank won't lend me $1 million. They'll give me 600 or 700. That's what got me thinking about this. What sort of policy can help Angela and Aaron and her husband to own a home rather than rent for the rest of their life? And this will do it.
And just in case circumstances were unfortunately to change in the other direction, in the event of a default or foreclosure, what's the Commonwealth's position on that equity?
Yeah, so I guess the first step there is the bank takes steps to make sure that they either adjust the mortgage repayments or they might make a freeze. They did a pretty good job of that, you've got to say, during the pandemic. They've put in place those sorts of policies to help people as well. In the event that the property would be sold, there'd be an independent evaluation, And the implementation details of that would make sure that you protect both the taxpayers' interest and the banks. Sure. But here's an interesting point. If we'd put a scheme like this in place any time in the last 30 years, you'd find taxpayers making money. Yeah. Everybody at home knows that investing in housing is a good investment. It's a long-term investment. That's why they set it up here in WA. It's why the New South Wales government is doing this as well. I know the Prime Minister today said, we're not doing this. Well, he should look at what the Liberal government's doing in New South Wales and what they're doing in Tasmania. They're doing this because they know it's a way to help Aussies who otherwise would never be able to buy a home.
There'd be economists and many people, in fact your party twice over at election campaigns, who say if you want to tackle housing affordability, negative gearing's the way to go, reforming capital gains tax. Are those policy ideas dead, buried and cremated?
They're gone. We took it to the last 2 elections, Andrew, and we got beaten.
Does it make sense?
Well,
Joe Hockey, in his valedictory, said it made sense.
The problem still exists, right?
Well, what are you going to do about it?
Well, what we announced today. But not just that. There are other things that we've committed to doing as well. The problem still exists. If anything, it's got worse. More and more Australians unable to buy a home. Schemes like this will make a big difference. But government's got to do more than just this. They've got to help out by building more affordable housing and more social housing.
Do you think, though, that negative gearing capital gains tax in the shape that they presently are causing problems for people who do want to get into the market?
No, but I do think government can do more here. And government can do more by building more social housing. We build about 3,000 social housing homes right across the country, all the state governments combined. Now, if Scott Morrison was here, he would tell you it's not his job to do that. Well, there's more homeless Australians today than ever before. Investing more here, and that's what we'll do if we win the next election, will make a big difference.
Let me ask the same question in a different way.
Well, you'll get the same answer.
Maybe not, Mr. Clare.
Apparently.
Yeah, OK. So if you have a first home buyer in their 20s up against someone who is heavily superannuated, has got other investments, someone in their 50s and 60s buys a home, that's not a fair contest, is it? If it's negative gearing that's involved.
We're not making changes to negative gearing, but the government's... Let me make another point here, because it's important in case there's any contradiction by the government. The government has some schemes in place at the moment to help people who want to buy a home not to have to pay mortgage insurance. 50,000 of those spots. Let me be very clear, we're keeping that. That is good, that is important. It helps people when they're up against an investor, because one of the other things you're up against when you're a first home buyer is not just do you have to win the auction and be able to get the mortgage. You often, well, you do, if you don't have 20%, you've got to pay mortgage insurance. Now, that's not cheap. Guess what? It's about 30 grand if you're buying a house worth around about $1 million. So we support that. We think that's a good and helpful policy. We'll keep that. But on top of that, there's other people we need to help. That scheme that the government has at the moment helps people to buy a home sooner without having to pay that bill. The policy we've announced today is about helping Aussies on a lower income, 90 grand or less, 120 grand if they're a couple, who otherwise would never buy a home because they can't get the mortgage they need to own that home.
All right, just finally, because among the many hats you wear, you are campaign spokesman, you've got your leader back. He gives his launch today. It is meant to give momentum. What propels you now through the final 3 weeks?
You can feel the momentum here. It's good to have the captain back on the field. I think he kicked a goal or two just then. And I think Aussies are looking for change. They're yearning for it. You know, they want something better, and they saw what that looks like on the stage today. You know, we've got a great leader. We've got an excellent team. You'd be struggling to find anybody that you'd want to put behind Scott Morrison at a press conference at the moment. And we've got the plans to fix the big challenges this country faces, whether it's childcare or whether it's aged care, whether it's making it easy to see a doctor or easier to buy a home. And you saw all of that today.
Might relegate the campaign spokesman to the back room now that the leader's back.
Well, I tell you what, there's
You're going to miss the spotlight.
There's a beautiful woman named Louisa who might be watching, and 2 little kids in Bankstown that'd love to have their dad back.
They'd welcome that all the way, I'm sure. Jason, Clare, we'll let you go about your campaigning, and thanks for joining our coverage this afternoon.
Good on you guys, and thanks everyone at home.
Yeah, this is close to wrapping up. We'll probably wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so. Probably bring in Jane Norman, who's been making her way around this Perth Stadium venue. Many of the party members have left now, and yeah, I think something we touched on earlier, Probes, there was a general expectation that Anthony Albanese would do that in short order as well and move off to another state, I think Queensland. So we'll wrap up before too long, but yes, this word hope, it's sort of coming on hot and strong from all Labor leaders. It's clear that the agenda they're trying to build here is sure about the 21st of May, but some of it does actually sound like multi-term aspirations that they're trying to build into the picture.
Yeah, these sorts of speeches are always about binaries, hope being the obvious opposite of a rather negative word. Now, the issue here for Anthony Albanese is that there has to be also a focus on the negative, and he's very much keen on this election being that referendum on Scott Morrison. So there's, unfortunately, today might be a day of positivity, but I think we're going to see a lot of negativity in the next 3 weeks
probably
or so.
from all sides. I notice with every passing night when you turn the television on, there's more and more campaign advertising on the television, and nearly all of it is negative, whether it's Labor or Liberal. Jane Norman is back with us here after doing a stellar job moving around this venue and collaring Mark McGowan, among others. I know it's very hard to analyse the vibe or the mood, Jane, but the event did what it was meant to do as far as geeing up the supporters, at least those who were physically here.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a massive amount of energy in the room. I don't know if you noticed, but the sort of Labor ad at the start of it was actually voiced by Russell Crowe. So there's also a bit of a Hollywood touch amongst the sort of Labor rock stars of your Mark McGowans, your Peter Malinauskas, and of course the luminaries of Kevin Rudd and Paul Keating. But Anthony Albanese himself performed really well. It was going to be a highly scrutinised performance. He's just recovered from COVID. He hit all the right marks. People that I was speaking to on the way out from the Labor team were really happy with the way that it went, and I think it achieved just what they needed, which was to get a bit of energy into the campaign as this marathon turns to a sprint to polling day.
It was more energetic than perhaps we had expected, given he's clearly suffered a bit from COVID. I've had COVID, you've had COVID.
Yep.
I don't know what's happened
to you, Greg. The fatigue is real. It doesn't look like it's showing with Mr Albanese.
But yeah, look, it was full of energy. There was great conviction, as you would expect with these campaign launches. And we won't have another one of these, I think, for another 2 weeks. What do you think that tells us, Jane?
I think it tells you that Scott Morrison is pitching at the undecided voters. We know right now both parties, according to published opinion polls, have such low primaries that it looks like at this stage we might be heading towards a hung parliament. To avoid that, both parties are pitching directly at undecided voters to try and win in their own right. And so we know that pre-poll opens in a week's time. Scott Morrison will probably launch his campaign, as you've been mentioning, around the 14th, 15th of May. That is 1 week to polling day. So he is trying to, get those voters who are waking up to the campaign and say, here's my message to you.
Yeah, but the primary vote's a very important question here for both parties, the Coalition and the Labor Party. We had the Paul Keating, when he won in 1993, he had a primary of 45. We had Kevin Rudd, who managed to get into the 40s too.
Seems
Labor
like
at the
another era, doesn't it?
It does.
Sort of numbers.
We have at the moment, according to polls, we've got the Labor Party at 37, which is below even what Julie Gillard
we
managed.
know they need to be in the 40s, right? That's what we're talking about, lowish primaries, because in the 30s you're in the danger zone of a minority government.
Julie Gillard, 37.99. Count the numbers there, but she had to negotiate victory. So I think these sorts of campaigns is about trying to generate that primary support as much as anything else, but it's trying to energise a community that's utterly worn out by a pandemic, a community which would rather do any other things than look at politics.
Yeah, it's really interesting to what extent Labor's trying to tamp down expectations of momentum building. That was one of the lessons they say they learnt 3 years ago, so they want to say that it's there but not overstated either. We might talk about that in just a moment. But in the final minutes remaining, why don't we just recap one element of Anthony Albanese's speech? He was rather enthused when he moved on through the 5 pillar announcements that he covered. One was on manufacturing. Now, we know that Labor has a big pot of money to try and get onshore manufacturing firing again here in Australia. It's something that he dwelt on for a few moments and, must be said, with quite a degree of enthusiasm. Let's just hear from the Labor leader once again before we wrap up our coverage.
We'll take resources like lithium and nickel, essential elements of the batteries that will power the vehicles of the future, and instead of shipping them to another country to make batteries, we'll have what we need to make them right here. And then we can sell them to the world. Here in Western Australia, but right around the country, we'll invest in local industries that create local jobs. We will bring manufacturing back home.
Yeah, so that gets Anthony Albanese going, as does the issue of infrastructure and transport in particular. He's a bit of, by his own admission, a wonk on those particular policy areas. So that was one of the sort of central themes there in the middle of the speech. Jane Norman, we've spoken about values and hope. There's also inclusion and diversity included in all of this. And I've got an ant. West Australian ants, jumping jacks. No, they're in Tasmania. Not familiar with these ones.
Just a regular black ant.
Women, the matter of the female vote was directly addressed.
It was, and that was one of the other themes that stuck out to me in this speech. So he's made a pledge to not only add secure work, but also add gender pay equity to the Fair Work Act in terms of their, priorities. So it's not like necessarily going to close the gender gap, but he made a pointed remark about, I'm here knowing that half the population is really important. And I know that going into this campaign, Labor sees women as a big, demographic. It is half the population, but they think that Scott Morrison has a particular issue with women, and so you can see that they are pitching at women with these kinds of policies where they're saying we'll really make closing that gender pay gap a priority for a Labor government.
Directed to the care economy, so aged care workers in particular. So that it was an interesting aspect of the speech there.
Even if the mechanism for doing that is not abundantly clear what it achieves, it's putting an objective into the Fair Work
It doesn't
Act.
mean it's going to happen. I think that it's just more interesting to look at the fact that he was really targeting the female vote there, because I think that there really is a view within Labor that Scott Morrison has a problem with women and that women might be crucial to Labor's election prospects.
All right, well, our coverage today from Perth has been greatly aided by a former or native West Australian in Jane Norman. Born and bred, always a West Australian, apparently, and one with great familiarity in our political editor, Andrew Probyn, who in a previous life reported extensively for the local newspaper here in the West. We hope you've enjoyed our comprehensive coverage, bringing you not only the analysis that we can bring to bear, but also key frontbenchers who will go forward with Anthony Albanese to carry this Labor campaign through the last 3 weeks. Of course, in the interest of balance, we'll be bringing the same treatment when we get there to the coalition launch. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. But from Perth, we are going to thank you for watching today. Hope you enjoyed our coverage and stay with us on ABC News.
My fellow Australians, right now everyone wants to buy your vote. So we're back to show